war that is started by an enemy like Hamas can only be responded to a certain level of casualties.
Here's a video of Douglas Murray explaining the double standards and how the world always blames Israel for no reason. Let's watch the video.
All right, just state it one more time, the moral calculus.
Well, the first thing, a war that is started by an enemy like Hamas can only be responded to a certain level of casualties.
All right.
I refute the idea. I don't think it's something which Britain or America has been expected to abide by in our past. I don't think it's something we've been expected to abide by in our present. Not many years ago, when we helped to flatten most of Mosul in order to get Islamic State out of Mosul, the French, British, and American forces involved did not worry about the number of casualties, and nobody counted the casualties.
Right.
We do not know to this day how many people were killed in Mosul or in northern Iraq and the borders of Syria to get ISIS. We simply wanted to get them because they'd carried out the Bataclan massacre and much more. Only Israel seems to be expected to act by this strange standard of what's often called proportionality. I like to think I shot down that idea at the beginning of the war when a journalist asked me about that, before Israel had even done anything. And I said, you know, if you believe in this idea of proportionality, it means that the IDF should be allowed to go into Gaza and kill precisely the number of children that Hamas killed and rape precisely the number of women that Hamas raped, and so on. Would that be acceptable? No. Would the Israelis abide by such a grotesque idea? Of course not. What then is the acceptable calculus? As you say, most of the international media have been relying on Hamas figures. There's a reason for that, by the way, which is that no Western media are in Gaza.
All right, we'll come to that as
They're
well.
not in there. They lie to their viewers. They fib. They cover up for their own journalistic failings. It's not even a failing. I don't blame a lot of them.
So let's come to that right now. Why is the reporting so, it runs from thin to biased to non-existent? I think back to the Iraq War, when we went into Iraq, John Burns, the great journalist, wrote from the New York Times. He was on the ground, he was writing, it was military reporting. You understood, any reader of the Times understood the objectives, understood the progress week by week by week. No such journalism exists. Yeah. Why?
Well, there's only two ways to be in Gaza. One is to be embedded with the IDF, as I've been, and the other is to have the permission of Hamas. Hamas are not very good hosts, and they're untrustworthy hosts. And so most of the Western media rely on journalists who are Gazans, all of whom are operating under Hamas restrictions at best, and most of whom are going to be Hamas supporters. And Hamas, as a result, has got out its figures. It came out with this figure of 30,000 people some months ago, and then they said that this was a number of casualties. They produced no evidence for it, and the world just repeated this figure. That figure, by the way, has been halved.
Has it?
Yeah. In the last few weeks, more official figures, better figures have come out from a range of sources, which say that the 30,000 figure was never true. But anyway, if you follow the IDF's figures on the number of Hamas terrorists that they've killed inside Gaza and the number of innocent civilians killed, if you take even the Hamas figures, you're dealing with roughly, and this is a horrible calculus, but this is war, you're dealing with roughly one terrorist killed to one civilian. America in the field in Afghanistan managed something like one terrorist to 3 or 4 civilians. Right. We don't really know. In Fallujah, how did we do? Not as well as the Israelis. So that bears lingering on for a second. But the second thing is that the reporting, as I've seen too many times now, the reporting is so ignorant because people repeat what Hamas has said within seconds. Near the beginning of the conflict, there's a place called the Shifa. It's sometimes called the Shifa Hospital. It should be better known as the Shifa Hamas Command Headquarters. It's a place we know from video footage, CCTV. They took some of the hostages on the 7th, and they didn't take them to the Shifa Hospital to treat them. The Shifa had a rocket land in its car park some months ago. And Hamas immediately announced that it was an Israeli rocket that had hit the hospital and killed 500 people. Note, by the way, that the Israelis took months to work out the exact number of figures from the 7th of October who'd been killed in Israel, because it's extremely hard. I've been to the morgues. I've seen the bodies. I've seen the charred remains. It takes a long time to work out who's dead in a burned out house. magically, Hamas can do it like that and can come up with a round figure. Oh, but after the world has said that the Israelis fired a rocket at a hospital and killed 500 people, after some time, sure as anything, we discover the rocket was an Islamic Jihad rocket fired from inside Gaza, which landed in the car park of the Shifa compound and may have killed some people, not 500. This is the day in, day out reality of reporting on that conflict. Just before we're sitting here, the Israeli Defense Forces are in Rafah, operating in unbelievably complicated situations, very, very intense fighting, to get the last remaining hostages out and to find Sinwar, the architect of the 7th, who's almost certainly hiding in the tunnels under Rafah. Just before we're sitting here, there's an outrage around the world claiming that the Israelis have been indiscriminately bombing a tent encampment of Palestinians. Now, already, after that lie has gone around the world, we discover what happened was that just yesterday or the day before, Hamas fired rockets from between the tents in one of the civilian areas, and they fired them at Tel Aviv. Now the Israelis located the launch pads, and they fired. And it seems that what happened was that a munition of Hamas arms exploded as a secondary explosion. Now, whose fault is that? All of these deaths are, in my mind, very clearly the fault of Hamas. There is a cost to starting a war. And there is no law of war that I know of that says you're allowed to start a war and massacre civilians in their homes, and then, when you start to lose the war you started, say this is unfair. We would accept this under no other situation, in no other circumstances. But it's the Jews, so it's different.
I think it's absolutely shocking to see how the world frames Israel for killing civilians in Gaza. And obviously, it's unfortunate that civilians in Gaza are dying, Palestinian children are dying, but the reality is that Hamas is the one that's hiding behind the civilians and using it and framing the civilian deaths, even though the civilian deaths have been numerous times been proven that they're wrong. Obviously, they're given by Hamas, and Hamas uses these civilian deaths and puts out these videos and propagating that Israel is the one that's doing the genocide, which is absolutely incorrect. In World War II, there were millions of civilians that died, unfortunately, but at the end of the day, that's what brought peace, and that's what it took to take down the Nazi regime and the people who were actually killing and genociding the world. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you want to watch more videos like these, please go to buymeacoffee.com/Jewish Uncensored to support our work, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one.